Welcome to Lynn Cullen Live, talk radio without the static. Email your questions and comments to lynn@pghcitypaper.com. And now your host, Lynn Cullen.
And a good morning at you. It be April 12th and a Friday, and it's warm out, and the sun's out, and I'm in an almost ebullient mood. I'm exaggerating only slightly. Well, what can I say? Here, what am I talking? I'm talking about a story that broke over the last 24 hours. This is which story am I talking about? The fact is it could relate to, I don't know. See if you get it. Let's see. You have to have the humanity of a wolverine even to think of something like this. Okay. Now, obviously, we are talking about something emanating from the Trump White House. You have to have the humanity of a wolverine. I don't want any people in Michigan to take offense, but wolverines, as you know, are vicious. Vicious. You have to have the humanity of a wolverine even to think of something like this. I couldn't sleep last night. Happens a lot these days. And at 3:30 this morning, I was checking out the Washington Post, and I came upon the story. The story that the Trump White House, we can trace this directly to the loathsome Stephen Miller, asked ICE what they thought of this great idea that Steve Miller had, which was you take a bunch of illegal aliens and you bus or somehow transport them into sanctuary cities run by Democrats. Specifically, they wanted to target San Francisco, which of course is the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi's district, where they wanted to dump human beings. It says how repulsive this idea was, not to mention probably illegal, all kinds of things, that Donald Trump's ICE department was appalled. When you get to the point where those guys are freaked out by something you're suggesting, then you know we've headed into territory that we do not want to even imagine. Even ICE found it too vengeful, too cruel, and it doesn't even begin to say that when they called their attorneys in to brush back a second attempt by the Trump administration to do this, that the attorney said, hey, wait, guys, we would have absolutely no legal justification to do this. I mean, what would we tell the nation? Why are we doing this? You got any ideas? Because the real reason we'd be doing it is not a reason you want out there. There was also concern that transporting large numbers of people cost money, and it would take money out of their budget that they really don't have. These are organizations that are already, of course, really struggling to deal with their mission right now, given the resources that they already have. But, yeah, I'll quote, why am I blanking on his name? Oh, God, I can't even think of who wrote this. Charlie Pierce. writing in Esquire. We've all long understood that Trump considers himself president only of those people who buy one of his hats. But weaponizing confused, desperate people has that special tang of cruelty to it that can only be found when two barbed wire minds are working in perfect harmony. Stephen Miller and Donald Trump. You have to have the humanity of a wolverine even to think of something like this. I believe one of the requests to ICE came immediately after Trump had to capitulate and reopen the government. You'll remember he closed down the government to no effect other than harming people, not getting what he wanted by doing it. And he was seething in general, and he came up with this. Hey, let's take these desperate people who are in, you want to use the word alien, who are in alien territory for them, not knowing where they are. Let's stuff them into buses and let's ship them to cities where they don't know anybody or haven't asked to go to, and let's let them loose. And of course, their idea of who these people are is that these people then would what? Murder Nancy Pelosi's constituents? Rape Nancy Pelosi's constituents? No, what they would do is, with all of the spunk and meager resources they would have, they would find jobs that no Americans want. They would work in the shadows with no protection. That's what they would do. They'd be a little too busy surviving to have the time to be murdering Democrats. Needless to say, reading that at 3:30 in the morning did not help me get back to sleep. And then there's this about the Attorney General. I'm sorry, loathsome is the word of the month. The loathsome Bill Barr saying that he felt that, well, here's his exact word was, I think spying did occur. He has absolutely no proof. He just thinks it. He thinks it because, well, he watches Fox News and talks to Donald Trump and wants to make Donald Trump happy. I think spying did occur. Well, he's talking about spying by the organization that, in fact, his department heads the FBI. And the FBI at the time he suggested was spying on Donald Trump's campaign was run at the time by James Comey. And James Comey was heard yesterday to say this. What? Something like that. Huh? He said, I'll use his actual words now. When I hear that kind of language used, it's concerning. Because the FBI, the Department of Justice, conduct only court-ordered surveillance. If the Attorney General has come to the belief that that should be called spying, wow. All righty. And then, I'm sorry, there's just like, it's wearing us down. I was realizing there's so many stories I haven't even mentioned that are big stories that in any other time would be things we would be very concerned about, talking about. Reporters would really be working these stories. And now it's just this constant tsunami of horror. So let's go over to a guy that some of us loved for a bit, who always had that sheen of slippery tawdriness about him, and that would be Michael Avenatti. We liked him because, of course, he was taking on Trump in ways that we knew was driving Trump crazy. And he, in fact, did some damage through his representation of Stormy Daniels. Anyway, he, of course, I believe he's in jail, isn't he? Or is he out on bail? I don't know. They just threw a whole bunch of other charges at him. He's facing life in prison. There's no doubt about it. This guy is gone. Michael Avenatti flew a little too high, too close to the sun, and has come crashing back to the ground. I want to share with you the most abhorrent Washington Post piece that is taken almost entirely, from the latest indictment of Michael Avenatti. It's a 36-count indictment. This came down yesterday, and I mean, what a crook. He was stealing from his own clients to the tune of millions of dollars. Now, if his clients were rich people, I wouldn't really care, frankly. But he was stealing from people who were about as down and out as a human being could be. And one of his clients that he stole from, was a guy that, his name is Jeffrey Johnson. And he's clearly got some kind of mental illness. He was initially arrested by the Los Angeles police when they found him naked out on the street, proselytizing or something. I mean, just the guy was nuts. And he was picked up, and he was brought into an emergency psychiatric facility. But he allegedly became violent there, and he was arrested again. And this time, this is what we do in this country. He's mentally ill and potentially violent, and he pushed a doctor, and so they threw him in jail. No sooner is he in jail than he jumped off a tier in the jail and, of course, injured himself. He was returned to the hospital, and after they patched him up a bit, he was returned to jail. A lot of his family was saying he shouldn't be in here. He's tried to kill himself once. He's paranoid. He keeps talking about jumping off the roof. At least house him on a low floor. Don't put him up on a tier where he could jump again. But, of course, he was put back into the general population of the prison, and he was again housed in a cell on the top tier. Even though at least one nurse had recommended he be placed on a lower one, given the fact that he had tried to jump to his death once before. The next month, 5:10 a.m., he was let out of his cell for breakfast, and he jumped onto a railing, straightened his arms out like he was about to dive, and in fact did. He dove, and he hit the ground 3 stories down head first. And when he woke up, he could feel nothing below his shoulders. He was paralyzed. No, from the waist down, he was paralyzed. He was a paraplegic. His family tried to find him a lawyer who could represent him in a lawsuit against the jail. And they found Michael Avenatti, who at that time was not a known entity. And he represented, he's a good lawyer. He represented him. He got him $4 million, which to a mentally ill paraplegic is everything. But it turns out, Avenatti told him that the settlement was confidential, which it was not. He told him that he could not be paid the $4 million all at once, which was also not true. He told him the county had to approve a special needs fund for Johnson, so there wouldn't be confusion with his Social Security benefits. All of that untrue. In fact, the county had already paid out all the money. It was just in Michael Avenatti's desk drawer. And that $4 million he dispersed not to his client, but to various personal accounts, others to pay for his private jet. He doled out living expenses to Johnson from the $4 million that was Johnson's. He gave him increments of like about $1,000 a month for him to live on. And over the course of 4 years and 69 payments, he had paid this poor soul just $124,000 of his own $4 million. The poor guy, Johnson, said, I don't like living where I am now. I'd really like to buy a house that would help me get around better. And Avenatti said, I'm so sorry, but the county has not approved the money. I don't have enough money for you. Then the poor guy, Johnson, gets last month, gets a visit from Michael Avenatti. And he's got good news. He tells him the county is finally ready to give him the entire settlement. This is 4 years after he was awarded it. The only thing Avenatti said is he just needed to sign a few documents. One of those documents turned out to be a client testimonial praising Avenatti as a loyal and highly capable and trustworthy attorney. Avenatti made this visit to Johnson and got him to sign this stuff directly after having been in a hearing in federal court where he was questioned about Johnson's settlement. He knew the cat was out of the bag, and he was trying to alleviate some of what he feared might be coming down on him. Avenatti posted this client testimonial yesterday on Twitter, claiming it was evidence that can attest to, quote, my ethics and how Johnson's case was handled. That is just one story in this indictment brought against Michael Avenatti. He might be the most vile human alive. Well, no, I'm sorry, that contest is unbelievable. Stealing from a paralyzed, mentally ill man. Well, bye, Michael. Nice knowing you. Remember, he was going to be one of the people running for the Democratic nomination. God almighty. Oh, look. Sorry. This is one of those stories you don't pay attention to. Your U.S. Senate yesterday voted to confirm another Trump appointee, nominee. Another fox has been given the keys to another hen house. And this is the Interior Department hen house, in which this fox will now oversee 500 million acres of public land and all of our coastal waterways. And of course, you know that what this guy wants to do with that land and those coastal waterways is turn them over to oil and gas and agribusiness. Because this guy, David Bernhardt, was a lobbyist for those companies. He understands their needs, their concerns very, very well. And so Chuck Schumer was left. Blah, 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 blah. It amazes me. Donald Trump campaigns on cleaning up the swamp, and he does exactly the opposite. An oil and gas lobbyist to lead the Department of the Interior? My God! Woo, that was a nice bank shot. I'm sorry you didn't see that. So, did you see Ron Burkle, who saved our Pittsburgh Penguins from bankruptcy, is in talks to buy the National Enquirer? That would be a big change if Burkle got hold of it. He's gone after newspapers before and never consummated any of these deals, but he is by political persuasion liberal. He's a staunch supporter of labor unions. He is a trustee of the National Urban League. He is also a trustee of one of Jimmy Carter's nonprofits that focuses on human rights. So Ron Burkle, who has a Pittsburgh connection, certainly, isn't he the one who, when our boy mayor, didn't he take our boy mayor in his juice box, flying in his private jet off to New York for a night? Am I remembering that right? I think Ron Burkle gave, yeah. You know, I always say Roethlisberger when I mean to say Ravenstall. I don't know why I do that. Didn't he take Mayor Ravenstall off on a incredible jaunt to New York City where they ate and drank and did who knows what? Because Burkle's a high flyer in many ways. He likes to pal around with Bill Clinton, too. Anyway, if he were to own the National Enquirer, I would think that tabloid would undergo a bit of a change. But then, what do I know? That's Trump's favorite newspaper. We have a call? Okay. Hello, caller?
Hey, good morning, Lynn, such
Hi.
as it is.
Hi.
Yeah, I actually caught your show yesterday, a replay of it on YouTube, and I was perhaps somewhat taken aback by your admittedly wistful initial hope that Bob Barr, a.k.a. the Bagman,
Bill Barr. Bill
Barr, excuse me, the Bagman, as I call him, the Iran-Contra cleaner, if we recall that.
Yeah. Well, that he
advised pardons.
That I thought he might want to do the right thing.
Yeah.
I know, and
yeah.
I thought, don't even remind people that you said that, but I thought, I was just being honest. I actually had hoped that he wanted to go down in history as like, one of the good guys who saved the Republic.
Okay, well, first, let's remember something. He's a Republican. So that was strike one. Number two, he was chosen by Trump, a.k.a. Donnie Two Scoops, the crime boss that we have in office currently. After writing, unsolicited, he wrote a letter, essentially his audition for Attorney General,
right,
basically stating that if a president, fires people to, prevent an investigation from going forward and offers pardons to those who are, would potentially be witnesses against that self-same president, the president is simply acting within his executive privileges and constitutionally protected. He cannot be
charged with
held liable for obstruction of justice.
Right.
Now let's remember, this is Bagman Barr, who advised the first George H.W. Bush, to pardon figures in the Iran-Contra
Caspar Weinberger,
crime, the scandal, who otherwise might have offered testimony against George H.W. Bush.
Did he also say in that memo that Trump could shoot someone in the middle of Park Avenue and no one would care? And if they did, it didn't matter because he was beyond the reach of the law? Unbelievable.
Well, no one in his base would care. And then, let's be honest, with Department of Justice policy being that you simply can't indict a sitting president, I mean, hey, you'd have to impeach him. You'd have to impeach and remove him from office first. And with Turtle Man Mitch McConnell in office, heading the Senate, that's not going to happen. But when I thought a little bit more about it, it occurred to me you brought up Barr's friendship with Robert Mueller, and that reminded me of a lot of other unpleasant associations where individuals, nearly all of them Republican in recent years, quite frankly, have revealed themselves to be of absolutely rancid character while in office, while acting as public figures. And yet they're completely accepted back into polite society, given positions of honor in academia, and where even prominent Democrats whose supposedly champion values that stand in complete opposition to such figures find common cause, become friendly with them. Look, Michelle Obama and George W. Bush. Look at Condi Rice's acceptance back into society. Condi Rice helped lie the nation into a needless, pointless war. Kirsten Kajilson, and yes, I'm making fun of her name because she's a Kajasshole. She'll land a plum spot in academia somewhere, or as a extremely well-paid consultant or lobbyist. And after all, she only signed off on state-sanctioned, kidnapping and farming children out to other families. In some cases, never to be reunited with their real parents. Hey, what's that? I mean, Henry Kissinger's gotten away with a hell of a lot more.
Yeah. The elite take care of themselves. They form a club of sorts. They all sort of are connected by virtue of their position and power. And because of that, they get to know each other as people and often like each other. So they're more willing, I think, to forgive past behaviors. I don't know. Are you suggesting that when somebody has served in public office and done objectionable things that they should be,
held accountable?
No, forced into some kind of exile, never to be, never to be seen again, never to be allowed to. Really? I mean, are you that? It seems a bit harsh to me. It does.
Wait, take a step back. No. Let's think about whether that seems a bit harsh. Whether people who commit acts that result in suffering or death, and
what president
otherwise, if they did them without state sanction,
what president
they would
hasn't?
Absolutely they would either be fugitives or they'd be facing consequences, and they'd have to serve time in prison.
What president hasn't done things that have killed innocent people, harmed people?
I'm not talking about an act like, for example, it's often brought up that President Obama signed off on drone attacks.
Yeah.
Including one prominent he was an American citizen by birth. He was an Al Qaeda propagandist. He did.
Well, there's more than that. I mean, some of these
contribute.
strikes. I mean, some of these strikes are, friendly fire,
Of
and
course.
all this kind of stuff. People die when you're in positions of that authority, and no one's perfect.
I'm not talking about acts where there's at least, we tend to judge the morality of acts not by the acts themselves, but by the motivations behind them, the circumstances in which they're committed, and to an extent their consequences. Certainly there are morally gray areas. There always are in nearly every aspect of life.
Should Harry Truman have been been decried as a mass murderer?
No, but one could argue about the morality of the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Obviously, it was, he was making an attempt to bring a very bloody war to a close without engaging in, massive hand-to-hand combat across the continent of Japan, which would have resulted in hundreds of thousands of deaths. But come up with some sort of similar justification for what was done to the families, in many cases, legally seeking asylum
I understand.
by Trump and Nielsen.
Yes.
Come up with a similar justification for the absolute lying that was involved in taking this nation to war in Iraq.
So do you really think, should Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, George W. Bush, Condoleezza Rice, and the whole bunch of them and all the neocons, should they be, what are you saying? They should be doing time?
Yes, they should be doing time. They signed off on torture of prisoners. They should be doing time. Of course they should be doing time. Henry Kissinger should be doing a life sentence. Anyone decent shouldn't associate with Henry Kissinger, for God's sake. He pushed for he formed the strategy of the utterly unsanctioned illegal bombing of Cambodia, which led to the rise of Pol Pot.
If this were if this were the way that we dealt with powerful people after they had served the country, why would anyone want to put themselves in jeopardy?
That's absurd. That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous. The idea is that the idea that if we actually hold criminal actions, reprehensible actions, and those who commit them to account, that no one will want to serve. I think that's absurd. I just think that's absurd. Yes, there are going to have to be very hard decisions made in some cases, especially by those in the executive branch, that will result in, that could result in civilian death. We've already covered that ground. But actions taken that are clearly fly in the face of international law, that fly in the face of what are called, the just rules of war, for example, or that, are clearly, rise to the level of criminal negligence anywhere else. If you had some family court judge who
I know.
separated
I hear you, but I think
family, children from families on misdemeanor charges, and then the children were transferred to another state, fostered out, or the parents' rights were terminated somehow, and there were no records kept, and they simply, it's just too much of a burden to try to reunite these children with their actual biological parents now. We would never accept, if we hold those people to account, who'll work as judges, family court judges, or social workers.
All right.
That's bullshit.
All right.
That's bullshit.
Okay. Well, we could argue till the cows come home, but
But look at Elliot Abrams. Elliot Abrams was involved.
I know about Elliot Abrams. You don't have to go through all this, but I am just saying, I don't know. What you're talking about is a scorched earth kind of a policy for people who, I don't know.
Commit crimes? Yeah, who commit crimes. They think they should face consequences.
Okay.
I don't think it should be rewarded.
Right.
I don't think it should be ignored.
Okay, but I think the way geopolitics is played,
I'm not talking about real politics. I know sometimes you have to deal with someone who's an utter creep, an asshole, a bastard. I mean, you can't, for example, any American president would have to deal with about Vladimir Putin.
Okay, are there any
who's
Democrats?
a murderer, an assassin,
I mean,
et
you're
cetera.
not concerned that all of the criminals you're coming up with are Republicans. Are there any Democrats that would go down under your harsh laws?
Oh, I'm certain there are. I think in recent
How about Bill Clinton on
times,
rape
the
charges? How about Bill Clinton on rape charges?
Sure, I think that if there could be a case, you don't excuse anyone simply because of his or her politics. Obviously, the allegation of rape against Bill Clinton was, it was very disturbing. I know
it didn't disturb us much.
Well, no, I think it actually got quite a lot of coverage. I mean, there have been reporters on both sides who've come to different conclusions about whether the charge, had any real, the allegation had real validity behind it.
Okay. Hey,
and
John,
I certainly, yes.
Okay. I'm just saying, I think, like this is over a quarter of the show at this point, and we're just going to go around and around and around. You've dropped something that certainly got people's heads going, and I appreciate that. And I don't pretend to know the right answer here. I don't. I'm just.
And I don't pretend to believe the situation's going to change anytime soon.
Well,
but
we can agree on that. Okay.
But all I'm going to say is this: I just think it's one of those things where if every day you wake up and you go outside and there's a hideous smell in the air, if you simply can't, if you can't really find a way to get rid of the stench, eventually you get used to it and it's just sort of accepted, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's certainly being proved now. Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
You're welcome. I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Bye. Bye. Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah. Well, heaven knows. Yeah. I think sometimes you get used to the stench because you do have to breathe. I want to. It's food for thought what he's saying, but I just. The Washington Post is such a better newspaper than the New York Times. I do not even know how to begin to tell you how I feel about having now reading both papers. I mean, it's just, there's no contest. There's very good journalists on both papers, I'm sure, but the Post just generally does a far better job and also has better writers, I think. Just saying. They have a piece today about how the Russians went after Bernie Sanders supporters. I have mentioned this before, how you can say that what they did for Donald Trump by targeting Hillary, but see what they also were working Sanders. They were working two groups, and the Post does this pretty in-depth report about the Russian efforts to get Bernie Sanders supporters so enraged at the Democratic Party, of which he is not a member, right? The Democratic Party, and also at Hillary Clinton, upping her, negatives with them, and telling them that a vote for Donald Trump is the way to get to her. And I was, when I first heard that that was part of this Russian campaign, I thought, well, how could they think that somebody who supported Bernie Sanders would vote for Donald Trump? And you know what? There were quite a few. And since the election came to just thousands of votes in pretty much 3 states, including our own, I met one of the people who did that. I was so stunned. I was in Allentown, Pennsylvania, at an ACLU meeting, and there was a young man there, young, 20s, and he was a supporter of the ACLU, which makes him, I guess, probably pretty liberal, probably. He thought Bernie Sanders was the be-all and end-all, and after Sanders did not get the nomination, he absolutely was ripe for the picking with the campaign that was being launched by the Russians. And I can't say that's exactly what happened to him, but he voted. He told me he voted for Donald Trump. I wanted to kill him. I was screaming at this kid. And he was still sort of, well, but I, and they, and she, and this. Anyway, some researchers from Clemson University, working with the Washington Post, the Post came to them and said, hey, we need you to look at all these English language tweets that we know came from Russia, but were designed to influence the election, and that were targeted at Bernie Sanders supporters. And man, they were all over the place. Many of them made no reference to Sanders, but they were designed to appeal to Bernie Sanders' angry backers and urging them to do anything but vote for Hillary Clinton. Thus, vote for Jill Stein, vote for Donald Trump, or don't vote at all, but do not vote for Hillary Clinton. And one of the researchers, after looking through, he's a professor of communications, after looking through all of these tweets and analyzing them, says this: I think there is no question that Sanders was central to the Russian strategy. He was clearly used as a mechanism to decrease voter turnout for Hillary Clinton. Now, I bring this up because I want to say that that will happen again. The Russian, according to the Post, the Russian social media strategy underscores a challenge that Sanders now faces as he, again, seeks the Democratic national presidential nomination, which annoys me in general because he's not a Democrat. Many Sanders supporters say he was treated unfairly by the Democratic Party and by Clinton. And the Russians they took that and worked it to undermine the Democratic nominee. And you'll recall that Bernie himself kept talking about it being rigged, right? The Post points out that one of the reasons that Sanders was on Russia's radar in the first place, that because he, like Trump, opposed trade deals such as the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and Putin liked that. So Putin hated Hillary Clinton because as Secretary of State, she really was tough on him. He would have happily taken Bernie Sanders, but he got Donald Trump. He tried to get Sanders, but he got Donald Trump. During the primary, Sanders gave at least 3 interviews to Russian-controlled television network, RT. And read this report if you can. It's Washington Post today. It's pretty eye-opening. The Russian trolls, I mean, if you stop and think about the WikiLeaks release of the DNC emails, that also was used to show that the Democratic Party was tilted against Sanders. One of the tweets from the Russians says, no, this is a tweet from Trump. Leaked emails of DNC show plans to destroy Bernie Sanders, Trump tweeted, and then said, rigged. So in that regard, Trump and Sanders were on the same page. Again, after the WikiLeaks dump, Russian trolls re-upped and increased their effort to persuade Sanders voters to, under no circumstances, support Hillary Clinton. They went after black voters. I don't know. Also, they showed that people who voted for Bernie were more apt to believe the false stories put out that Hillary Clinton was in very poor health. A large number, incredible, believed that Clinton had approved weapons sales to ISIS. So I'm just saying, they're going to be out there again. The Russians will strike again. They're already, I'm sure, busy. And it is imperative that the Democratic candidates defend each other against these kinds of threats. And I frankly wouldn't trust that Bernie Sanders would do that. Personally. Although, God forbid, the Democrats nominate Bernie Sanders to run against Donald Trump in 2020. Man. I'll vote for him. But that is a lousy candidate. Any candidate that Vladimir Putin likes, I'm sorry. What is this? Captain Underpants was just named one of the American Library Association's most challenged books of 2018. And also John Oliver's A Day in the Life of Marlon Bundo. Are you kidding me? I love Captain Underpants. When my kid was a kid, I loved Captain Underpants. It says here, Dave Pilkey's Captain Underpants series was perceived as encouraging disruptive behavior. Well, yeah. Well, of course. Because kids have no control, and they would... You want to encourage kids to read. That's the idea. What could be more wonderful than reading about this bad kid, Captain Underpants? Jeez. Of course it was encouraging disruptive behavior. Oh, and here's another reason Captain Underpants people didn't want libraries, or probably school libraries especially, to have him. It was also perceived in one of the books in the series, Captain Underpants and the Sensational Saga of Sir Stinks-a-Lot. That one was challenged because there was a same-sex couple in it. So the same authoritarian jerks who, don't think that thinks only certain people's love can be sanctioned, also would see Captain Underpants as somehow some fifth column taking our children and making them into juvenile delinquents. Geez, Captain Underpants, I had no idea. The ACLU often has, for banned books, they have people read from the most banned books. I've been a participant in that many times, but man, if they ever ask me to again, I know now what I'm reading from. I'm reading Captain Underpants. In 2012, Captain Underpants surpassed 50 Shades of Grey as the most banned book. Wow. Oh, God. All right, and then this, just in case you're not ready to puke. In an interview with The Atlantic, Trump lavished praise on his daughter, saying he thinks she would have made a great World Bank president. Why, Mr. President? Oh, she's very good with numbers, he said. And he says she'd be great at the United Nations as our ambassador. Why, Mr. President? She's a natural diplomat. But of course, I couldn't nominate her because if I did, they'd say nepotism, nepotism, when it would have had nothing to do with nepotism. But she would have been incredible, says Trump. He also praised his daughter for having great calmness. He says, I've seen her under stress, under tremendous stress and pressure. She reacts very well. That's usually a genetic thing. Well, he's taking credit for it. Because God knows he shows a great deal of calmness. It definitely must come from him. And then Trump did something really extraordinary in this interview. He must have been reminded by the interviewer that he had other children. So this is the first time I've ever heard him say anything about these two. He is quoted as saying this: Barron is young, but he's got wonderful potential. He said, I'm surprised he even knows his son is Barron. Right? And then he followed that with, and Tiffany's doing extremely well. Those are the two you can tell he doesn't give a shit about at all. And then he goes on to say, Don is He's enjoying politics. Actually, it's very good. That's all he managed for Don Jr. And Eric is running the business. I mean, the children have been very, very good, says the president. Just wanted to share that with you. Okity dokity oak. Guess that's it. Just want to note that Chelsea Wagner has been bound over for trial in Detroit on one felony count of resisting and obstructing the police at that hotel last month. And there you have it. Jeez. Okay, that's it for me. Weekend starts now, at least for me, and enjoy it, I hope. Go Pens. That's for you, Bob and Braddock. Go Pens. Go Pirates. Just go. That's talking to me. I'm out of here. Goodbye.
Lynn Cullen Live, Monday through Friday from 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. and archived at pghcitypaper.com. The opinions expressed on Lynn Cullen Live are those of the host and do not necessarily reflect the viewpoints of Pittsburgh City Paper or its advertisers.